What's up? What's up? What's up? We are officially live with the very first of many to come Agency Hot Seat. I will be your one and only host, Ryan Watson. I am one of the founding partners here at Upsourced. Look, this is the first time we've done this. So here's what we're doing. The point of this is I'm going to be on live I see some people already in the audience. I'm going to be here taking your questions, whatever your burning questions are relative to agency operations, agency finance, sales and marketing. I mean, anything you name it, hit me with it. And what I will do is I'll give you my perspective based on our many years of experience here running agency ops and finance. So with that, and we've got the full 2 hours. If we continue to get people cycling in and out, we'll stay on. If not, we'll keep it to a half hour. I know we got a number of questions offline ahead of this event. So while we wait for some folks to provide some things, and by the way, if you want to ask questions, drop your questions into the chat, and I'll go ahead and answer them as they come along. But in the meantime, Caroline, I know you are playing. You're playing facilitator here, and so why don't you go ahead and drop in the chat the first question that we got offline. Okay, cool. Question from an email earlier. What is the most underrated financial metric agencies often overlook that could significantly impact their profitability? Yeah, okay, so I can answer this. Well, look, first of all, and I'm going to try not to go onto a soapbox because I often do when we talk about the concept of agency metrics, right? So I'll try to be brief. My brief point of view on agency metrics is that we have a framework called the hierarchy of financial needs. The hierarchy of financial needs is meant to be a sequential set of KPIs that are relevant to you at your specific moment in time. The idea of is like, hey, look, there's 25 KPIs, 30 KPIs. You see these blog posts of all the things that you could measure for your agency. And it's my pretty strong belief that sure, there may be 20 or 30 KPIs that you theoretically could measure for your agency. But given where you are in your moment of time, there's probably just one or two that matter. There's probably just one or two that are actually going to move the needle, in part because we can't focus on everything, and in part because these are not independent metrics. They are interrelated. And so when I improve one, I am naturally going to get some lift in all the others. And so better to focus on one thing, create some momentum, some progress, improve and solve that metric, and then lift my head up and look at all the others and say, okay, now what should I focus on? So anyway, I come at what metric should I be looking at, not from here's a sea of metrics, this is the most interesting. The most interesting or important metric for your agency is going to be very specific to where you are at your in the agency hierarchy of needs. However, I guess the one thing that I will say to not cop out of this answer is almost all of our, and I can share in the chat, or Caroline, if you want to drop in the chat a link to our hierarchy of financial needs content, where we go through like, what is it? How do you think about it? Where do you find yourself on the hierarchy? Anyway, what I will tell you is almost everybody on the hierarchy of financial needs finds themselves first at the gross margin step. That's the step where most people fail. And within gross margin, if I have a gross margin problem, I have one of two potential problems. I either have a utilization problem, i.e., I'm paying people to do service, or I'm paying people whose job it is to perform service, but I don't have enough work for them, so they're not doing service. Or I have a project profit problem. In other words, people are doing service, they're doing work. It's just I'm not making enough money on their time relative to the cost rate to actually generate a margin. And what I will tell you is that project profit is the thing that agencies probably underinvest in, like the infrastructure to manage, to measure and to manage, and the feedback loop to evaluate what was my project margin in flight for everything we were doing. What are the ones that aren't doing well? What are the reasons for those things? How can I go in and triage those? Like having a project profit feedback loop is the thing that agencies often underinvest in to the greatest degree. And I would say, as an answer to the emailed question, that would probably be the thing that I would argue is the most overlooked. Cool. All right. So hopefully that person watches this back and they find some value in that. I see a couple other folks have entered the room. If you have any questions, just as a reminder, we're doing this live. You can come in, pop out, but if you have questions that you want me to answer in the broad world of agency finance and operations, just drop your question in the chat and I will tackle it. In the meantime, okay, cool. Another offline question. Um, Another question we got offline. Where should I look to cut costs before I have to cut staff? I wish this was not a question that I had experience answering, but boy, do I ever. Unfortunately, 2023 was quite the bear of a year for a lot of folks. And so we certainly had a lot of experience looking at various ways to cut costs. Let me start by saying up front, unfortunately, agencies are people businesses, and they're far and away the largest line item, like consolidated line item, is wages, is people. And so there aren't often that many areas where if I'm looking to cut costs, that's because I'm running out of cash. I've got a low amount of runway. I'm not producing a lot of profit. And so I'm probably not nibbling around the edges at this point. You know what I mean? I'm probably not, my a $250 a month subscription away from turning the corner and being able to sort of like thrive, right? So generally speaking, if I think about an agency, I have gross margin. Gross margin represents revenue minus cost of goods sold, which is, this represents the core profitability that I make on the thing I do, right? And so generally my cost of goods sold are by and large the service wages that I pay, right? So, revenue minus service wages, and I'm targeting I'm targeting a gross margin somewhere in the 50% range. And then I've got operating expenses. SG&A is what we sort of abbreviate it to, selling, general, and administrative. This is like overhead. This is OpEx. And the reality is the vast majority of the things that are going to move the needle are sitting in either service wages or G&A wages. They're human beings. My out-of-pocket costs, my things outside of wages, are often relatively minor. So again, for that reason, it's not often going to be the case that I have a lot of really fruitful places to look outside of looking at staff. But if I do, I would say they fall into, I'll actually just speak from personal experience this week. So a couple areas, one being debt service. So if you had a tough 2023 and in order to make it through 2023, rather than reduce costs, you went out and got outside debt, whether it was high interest, loans, AR lines of credit, whether they were credit cards, whatever. It is not inconceivable that you're spending a lot of money to service that debt in the way of interest and in some ways principal payments. And so that's one area, which is, there are institutions that exist to consolidate debt, right? Where you can take a 45% AR line of credit over here and a 25% credit card over here, and you can go and you can consolidate these together in a term loan that would presumably have a lower effective rate of interest. Your ability to do that is going to be dependent on a number of factors, but if you find yourself in that position, that is absolutely a place that I would look. So debt service is one potential place. Travel. So, again, I think, and maybe I'll sort of like bucket travel into sort of sales and marketing. This is a little bit of a catch 22. But I think some agencies that are hitting that maybe hit hard times and are struggling with profitability believe that they can spend their way out of it through just spending on activities that sound like on the surface would be ROI generating, would be sales and marketing, but in reality, those often have longer tails or dubious paybacks. And so this idea of tricking yourself into thinking like, well, I got to go to all these conferences because my number one problem is sales, and so I'm gonna get on a plane and I'm gonna keep going. In reality, that's probably the wrong activity for you to be doing right now. A lot of those things that you're spending money on probably have much longer tail activities and are making your problem worse, not better. And so I would really scrutinize that spend. And then I think the other thing that I often see, and this is not a particularly self-serving answer because in a way our firm Upsource falls into this bucket, which is consultants. And so I think when you find yourself in a place where, you're looking for, look, let's just be real. If I'm looking to cut costs, things ain't going great, right? Like I'm struggling probably with revenue. I'm obviously struggling with profitability. I'm probably feeling, relatively alone and I'm feeling vulnerable and I'm an entrepreneur. All agency owners, entrepreneurs. And so I have a lot of empathy for how it feels to struggle. And we all have been there. And so sometimes when you're in that place, you feel like, oh, I need to spend money on silver bullet answers. Like, you start to doubt yourself. I must not know anything. I don't know how to run this dang business. So I'm just going to pay people whose job it is to be smart and to be able to run this business. So I'm going to pay a bunch of outside consultants. I'm going to pay a biz dev consultant. I'm going to pay an ops consultant. We're going to get more efficient. I'm going to pay whatever. And so then, it makes you feel like, I'm dumb. I don't have the answers. So I'm going to pay people who have the answers. And the reality is, like, there is no playbook for this stuff. Everybody's specific situation is harder. And the only one that's going to be able to dig you out of the place that you're in is you. And by the way, you are perfectly capable of doing it. You got here for a reason. You are going to get yourself out of this. The wrong impulse is to spend the money you don't have on bringing all these outside experts to pontificate on how you're going to dig out of this. So that is another sort of behavior cycle that we often see. And that is an opportunity to cut some costs. It's to get rid of some of these, particularly the consultants that are not deriving to the one thing that matters the most. If you have an outside consultant who's perhaps, who's contributing to your funnel, like they're bringing you top of funnel leads, and you are currently, like, you don't have the hope or belief, but you have the evidence of like positive ROI. Okay, well, I'm not suggesting that you shut off a thing that's actually providing value, but all the things that have like dubious outcomes, where you're spending money for the hope of a silver bullet, cut that stuff. It's digging the problem deeper versus helping. So cool. Okay. These are great questions so far, Caroline. So keep these coming. Okay, cool. Related question. Is it better to contract employees or hire FTEs? Are contractors a way to cut costs? Well, boy, it really depends. The contractor versus FTE sort of debate balance is really an interesting one. It's worth kind of digging into. The thing about so like the classic pro con between a full-time employee and a contractor would be this: a full-time employee, when appropriately utilized, is going to be cheaper than a freelancer, right? Like if anybody, this is not going to come as a surprise to agency owners. If you've hired freelancers, obviously their rate is going to be more on a per hour basis than the per hour rate you're paying to a full-time employee, of course, because the full-time employee is getting 40 hours, right? They're getting security, they're getting benefits, consistency. And so on a per hour basis, the full-time employee is cheaper, assuming that you have the work for them. You're also going to get a lot of reliability, loyalty, predictability, right? The sort of the converse of that for a freelancer would be, this person is not, they're not beholden to you. And so you might have a relationship and say, oh, I got this person lined up for this project. And then all of a sudden a better project comes along with a better rate. And, there's just not as much tying them down to working with you as opposed to just saying, see ya, I'm going to go take this other project. It could leave you in a really rough position. So, certainly, those are a couple of the trade-offs. The flip side, though, is, of course, a freelancer provides flexibility, and that's the reason to do it. Like, you pay more on a per hour basis, you pay more on a rate per hour basis for a freelancer because you want and or need the flexibility, i.e., you don't have enough work for them. Like, I don't have enough work to utilize a full-time employee, so my effective cost is going to be cheaper because it's cheaper to pay 1/4 of the hours, even if it's twice the cost, than it would be to pay a full person who's not going to be utilized. So that's, obviously that's one of the considerations. So generally, there's a couple of like rules of thumb here to think about. One being, like if you're growing, you're in what we call create mode. You're sort of like 0 to 1 million in revenue. We kind of say roughly, like, until you get to the point where you've got line of sight to utilizing 50% of that person. So in other words, you have 50% of their utilization booked. then you're probably going to need to rely on freelancers. That's almost definitely going to be the better answer, because the freelancer is probably not going to be more than twice as expensive, and that flexibility is really important to you early on. So only until the point where you're able to utilize greater than 50% of their time does it make sense to consider this. But even after that point, my recommendation is to keep some mix of full-time and freelancers to provide yourself a safety valve if demand is going up or going down, right? Because again, like the trick about agencies, the whole job we do here is that we are matching supply and demand, right? We have demand, which is the projects that are coming in, and these are chunky, right? Like I could sign tomorrow a $500,000 project over 6 months, and that's going to utilize, a team of whatever, 3. But if that doesn't come through, like, oh my gosh, now have 3 people that are totally on the bench and I don't have any work for them. So it can be really chunky. And so, part of the job is just having, is managing to that sales cycle and estimating what is my current and future weighted utilization. The other, so that's half of the job. But to make that job a little bit more palatable and doable, we use freelancers, right? And so the nice thing is that if that $500,000 project comes in that maybe you weren't counting on and that needs to get started next week, if let's say 20% of your staff are freelancers and they're only giving you 20 hours, well, theoretically I can spin them up, right? I can flex up to using them for 40 hours or maybe even a little bit more. And in the immediate term, I can meet the need of this new project without having to go out and try to hire a new person and have them start in 1 week, which is, simply not possible. Similarly, if I, had a big project that I was expecting to close, or I had, this is a client that represents, 20% of my business, and they don't renew, and it was a surprise to me. Oh, shoot. Well, now I have a utilization problem. I have too much staff for the work that I have. I'm going to lose money. If I'm 100% W-2 in that situation, I might have to lay somebody off, and that's not a particularly great place to be. If there's a component part of my labor that are 1099, that are freelancers, well, then I can sort of dial some of that back. I can let some air out of my service model, and hopefully that is what is required. That's all that is needed in order to reduce my wages so that I can keep an adequate gross margin, and I can make money without having to lay anybody off. So having freelancers allows you to dial back a little painlessly and to dial up a little more flexibly relative to W-2. So anyway, the point is, like, these are 2 tools in the toolbox. It's not an either or. They're very situational. It's really just about what are you trying to accomplish? What are your opportunities and risks? And what's the right tool for that moment? But as you mature, you're likely to use them both, freelancers and full-time. Cool. Okay. I think, I got a question in from Slack. The question is, what's the most important thing to focus on when trying to get your agency to its first million? We're trying to grow our agency, and that feels like the first big milestone. Well, we often talk about 1 million as the first inflection point. We have this, I'm not going to go all the way into the details, but we have this framework where we sort of catalog agencies by their growth stage. So create mode is the very first stage of agencies. That's from $0 in revenue to $1 million in annual revenue. And then we have build mode from 1 million to 3 million. Build mode matures into grow mode, and grow mode matures into scale mode. And so the very first stage here is create mode. And we often say, like, look, when you're in create mode, your whole job is to get to $1 million in revenue. And at that point, you're a real business. You have a right to exist. You may be coasting in on, shoestring and bubble gum. But there are very few mistakes that you can make in create mode that we cannot work out in build mode. And while at that $1 million mark, you probably won't be profitable, you'll probably be incredibly overworked. As an owner, you probably have a job more than you have a business. And you're probably wearing a million hats and you need a vacation really badly. That's okay, because at that phase, we can actually start to work on improving the unit economics of the business and ultimately getting you to that point where you are profitable and you can eclipse 3 million and mature to the next stage. But the question was, how do I get from 0 to 1? And the answer to that question is perhaps maybe it's fulfilling, or maybe it's satisfying, maybe it's not. But this stage is 100% about sales and service. Like, you're starting from scratch. You're a service business. Nobody knows about you. Nobody's using you. And so your job at this point is is to find people who want to buy the thing that you say you can do, and then to deliver the thing that they say they can do. And this is the whole thing. And by the way, 80% of the business is selling. And so 100% of your job, or 80% of your job, is to find a way to define your services in such a way that people want to buy, and to find the people for whom that resonates with, so that they do buy from you. And there's just no shortcut to that, right? Like, there's just no shortcut to figuring those things out. And over time you will. And then, the other half of that challenge is to say, okay, well, I sold my first contract. It was let's just say I'm a traditional brand identity agency. So I sold my first project. It's whatever it is, $75,000. And look, if I have a $75,000 like branding project where I'm going to do a logo and a website, I might need a number of people to do that. I might need some copy. I might need some strategy. I might need some design. I might need some development. And $75,000 is just not enough to go out and hire a full-time person for all of these, right? So back to our full-time person versus contractor discussion. In all likelihood, you're going to have to find a way to patch together sort of a ragtag group of people to deliver service that meets the unique selling proposition that you went out there and sold. And so that's the other half of this challenge, right? Is to cobble together some sales and to get people out there to resonate with your message, and then find a way to service it in an economical way. By and large, through, you may in the early days have a partner who, again, ideally, if you're one of these founders and you're at 0 to million, you're bringing something to the table, right? Like you're doing that. You're the designer and your partner is the developer, as a for instance. But if you and the founding team, if it's more than just you, can't do everything, then you're probably not going to be able to afford full-time folks for your first couple of projects. You're going to have to get freelancers, and then you're going to have to get some sales momentum, string this project on top of another project on top of another. And now I've hit, on a sort of 90-day weighted forecast, I now have more than 50% utilization for a copywriter. Oh, great. Now I can hire a full-time copywriter. And then I got to go back to the well and keep selling. And then, so that is the trick. And I wish I had like a magic secret for you on how to make that happen. But there is no secret, right? There is no secret. The path to success looks a couple of different ways. Quite frankly, the folks who get from 0 to million, often start either because they've built a brand already, like they're, it's a creative director from a big agency in town. They go off on their own and they're able to get their first 5 clients through that reputation in their network. They may have worked with an agency. They have a couple of big name clients that they can bring over. And so, that sort of underpins their first $500,000. They may have spent, a career as a managing director at an agency for 20 years, and they've stocked, I don't know, $750,000 away in savings, and they're just ready to put that into the business. And they're just, they've got a little bit of independent wealth, and they can afford to hire some folks to help them. Everybody's got their own unique story. But generally speaking, like the story, the assets you're bringing to the table are in large part unique to you and what are going to catapult you onto that 1 million. No secret sauce there. Cool. Okay. All right. Just as a reminder, I've noticed a couple additional people have joined in to the live here. We're out here. We're answering questions. I'm in the hot seat. To be honest with you, it's 40 degrees today, so it's not that hot. But you'll see Caroline is taking questions from email, taking questions from Slack. Feel free to jump in there with Caroline as well. Any questions that you have in the realm of agency finance, operations, whatever, put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. I'm not going to profess to know everything, but I can give you the 12 plus years of experience that we've had at Upsource, working with, well over 100 marketing agencies of various sizes. I can give you my perspective. Cool. Okay. In the meantime, looks like, okay. So here's a question from Slack. Looking to change up our year-end bonus plan this year. What are some good options? We want to reward employees in a financially smart way. Cool. I love this question. I don't have like a canned answer prepared for this question, so that makes it exciting. So look, first of all, the incentive comp that, so what we're talking about is incentive comp. The incentive comp that is appropriate is going to depend a little bit on, it's going to change per role. Okay. So generally, I mean, I think I'm going to divide an agency sort of broadly into 3 buckets. Your first bucket would be like your executive leadership team. And so these may be your partners, these may be your president, your near, you know, your near partners, whatever that is. Executive leadership team, that's group 1. Group 2 is likely to be your department chairs, heads of, I call them deputies. These are people that generally lead. And by the way, in smaller agencies, this bucket may not exist. But in larger agencies, often in the grow mode category, so this would be like a $5+ million agency, you're going to have, at that stage, the business is a little bit too big, a little bit too unwieldy to try to manage as a sort of singular silo. And so your goal in managing that business is to try to make the agency smaller. And you make it smaller by dividing it into component parts. And some agencies will divide component parts as portfolios of clients, right? So, we're an outsourced marketing firm. We work with home services companies. We've got whatever 50 clients. And so the way that we manage this business is we've got like 3 portfolio managers. This person has 15 clients, that person has 15 clients, that person has 15 clients, right? They kind of operate as pods. That's one way to do it, right? If you've got homogenous services, then that's one of the only ways to do it. And then if you have heterogeneous services where I've got like a design department, I've got a strategy department. I mean, bonus points if these are discrete lines of business and discrete revenue streams. But even if they're not, like we all collaborate to deliver one end product, you can still manage them as departments based on like the service or the expertise. And so the people that sit above them, that's kind of another bucket, right? And then the third bucket is just everybody else, right? Just the individual contributors or team lead kind of folks. So I'll start from the end and move my way up. For the everybody else, what I recommend is a couple things. One, a bonus plan that is uniform across everybody, right? So for this group of people, we win together, we lose together. We're all on the same plan. Number 2, keep it simple. Like the whole point of a bonus plan is to motivate behavior. What does not motivate behavior is a thing I don't understand. Right. And so if it's like, hey, it's based on our OKRs and we create OKRs every quarter and then we look to see if we did them right. And this OKR has a 20% weighting and this one has a 40% weighting. But then in the second quarter, we changed those. Like, people, their eyes glaze over and they're like, I have no idea how to affect this. I don't know how I'm actually going to earn my bonus. Fingers crossed. I hope this turns out in my favor. But like, this isn't motivating me because I don't know how to, I don't understand it. So keep it very simple. Again, I'm now, this is my personal bias coming in and not necessarily the right approach for every agency, but I really just like top line revenue. Like if I'm a growth focused agency and I like saying, hey, look, we're 3.5 this year. We're trying to get to 4.2 at the end of the year. Like that's what we're all focused on. I really like that. I think, I've also seen agencies use like, if you have a feedback loop around like client satisfaction or exit surveys or things like that on projects, that's another pretty good one. Like, hey, look, we're all, we are here to get 9 out of 10 or better on our, CSAT or whatever. That's not a bad way to do it. But anyway, the point is choose like one number, make it simple, make it easy to understand, make it clear how everybody's bonus is impacted. So again, I really like a percentage of your salary. So hey, everybody, our target bonus is 5% of your salary. You earn 5% of your salary if we achieve this goal. The goal is hitting 4.2 million in revenue. Now, I often see agencies have the opportunity to scale that down. Like, so it's not all or nothing. Hey, if the goal is 4.2, but if we get 4, then you'll get 3% of your salary. And if we get 4.5, you get 8% of your salary, whatever that looks like. So I do like the ability to scale it up, scale it down, make it pretty simple. And so that is by and large how I would suggest incentive compensating, that sort of all the lion's share of the individual contributors. For team leads, for deputies, now these are people who are, again, they're owning lines of business. They should be managing like modified P&Ls, right? Like if I'm running the development group, I should have a gross margin target that I'm managing to. I should have like utilization metrics that I'm managing to. I should be accountable to, and incentivized to drive those outcomes. And so for these individuals, and again, these are heads of, so they're more sophisticated. Um, I would I would create probably a custom plan for those individuals where generally as a percentage of my salary, my bonus is going to be larger. And so these people might be looking at 20% of their salary or whatever it looks like, as a function of hitting these targets outlined in sort of largely the same way. So those individuals, and the for both of these, right? So the average, the individual contributors, simple metric, um, you know, simple metric. If we hit it, we get this percentage of our salary. The deputies are going to have maybe a more complicated metric, maybe more than one. But again, it's individualized to them. So it's not a we win together, we lose together. This individual, the development department wins or loses, and you, owner of development, are in control of that. For both of these, by the way, it is incredibly important. If you're going to create a bonus plan, and the goal of the bonus plan is to motivate behavior, you got to talk about it. The one mistake I see that people make in rolling these things out is they're like, yeah, here's what happened. Here's our bonus targets. And then nobody ever talks about it again, right? Like, we get to the end of the year, people are like, wait a minute, do we have a bonus plan? Like, what was the target again? Are we on track? Like, we've missed the whole opportunity. So, bake in, whether it's if it's a monthly meeting, a quarterly meeting, you've got to be, hey, everybody, remember our target is X. We have done this. We have done this so far. We are on track, off track. And then the executive leadership team are going to have probably their own plan. And I think they could have something, their plan is going to look more like the deputies' plans, dependent on their particular kind of work. The only thing I would add to the executive leadership team is these are people that you're likely to compensate or incentivize with some form of equity or synthetic equity. Generally, we recommend phantom stock in these kinds of situations. Phantom stock can provide, I mean, the beauty of phantom stock is it's very flexible. And so it can provide sort of profit sharing benefits. It can provide liquidity benefits in the event you sell your agency to these individuals on a percentage basis, mirroring the economic value of an actual share of stock. The benefit is that, most of our agencies are pass-through entities. They're partnerships, they're S-corps. And so, of course, if you are one of those partners, you're getting a K-1 every year. And, not everybody in your agency you want to give a K-1 to. And not everybody is sophisticated enough with their own tax situation and wants to pay some outside accountant to deal with this stuff and manage, certainly in the case for partnership, manage estimated tax payments and all that kind of stuff. So the beauty of the phantom equity is that you can circumvent all that stuff. They are not actually a shareholder for tax purposes, but they by and large get the value that you would get in the event of, year-end profits and a liquidity event without having the tax burden. So anyway, that's how I would that is how I would incentivize these individuals. Okay. All right. Here's a question. And I think this might be, I think this is our last question for now. So this has been great. This is awesome. Last question. We're having trouble collecting past due invoices. What should we do? This is a wonderful question. Okay. So you got a couple of options. I will tell you that, the first thing we got to figure out is why are these invoices past due, right? I would say that many of our agency clients, well, that's not clients, but many agencies who have past due invoices don't actually know what's the cause because they haven't had the conversation. I can tell you that. So before my role here, I ran operations for a media and marketing agency. And when I started, our aged AR was 80 days. That was the average time it took us to collect AR. And after 3 months of focusing on it, we went down to 42 days. And I'd say the biggest change that we made was we just got alignment immediately with regard to where these invoices are supposed to go. I came in, we had all this past due invoices. So we followed up with people and said, hey, we sent you the invoice. We haven't gotten a payment. And so many of the conversations were like, oh, I just assumed that I got this invoice, but so also did the Ariba portal. And so also did the AR inbox. And so also did this, Jane over here in this group. And we'd be like, no, we sent it to you. We thought you were taking care of it. And there was just miscommunication, right? It was a diffusion of responsibility. And so, this invoice sat out in the ether and nobody was doing anything with it. It wasn't even working its way through the approval and payment process. So that's kind of number one. It's like, make absolute certain that you get it, you send the invoice and then you follow up and just say, hey, I want to make sure you got the invoice. Want to make sure it got to the right place. If you have any information that you need in order for us to get this paid, please let us know. So that's number one, right? Like, pick up the phone and have a conversation. The other reason, so again, if I'm not getting past due invoices paid, it's either because there's a miscommunication, it's in the wrong place, or it's on purpose. And that happens too, right? The on purpose of it could be a service disagreement, right? Like, this is a person who does not believe they got what they were buying, and they are not paying for that reason. And I'm not even going to really touch that. To triage that requires kind of a knowledge of like what's going on and how do I want to sort of navigate that situation. The other reason is like, I simply can't pay, right? I'm out of money. And so in the situation where I've got a past due invoice and I can't pay, I think you got a couple options for that. Well, the primary option is, again, first, have a conversation. And then number two is make sure they know it's not all or nothing, right? I think so often you have these buyers, these customers who are like, I got 50, I'm hitting hard times. I owe you $50,000 for a project. You did a wonderful job. I don't have 50,000. Like, the invoice number says 50. I don't have it. You get on the phone with that person, you say, look, I get it. You don't have 50. Do you have 5? Because guess what? I could really use 5. Why don't we get on a payment plan? You give me 5 every month or every week for the next, in this case, 10 periods, and we'll get, we'll rid that AR item over time. And so, there are ways to work out a payment plan, some sort of middle ground, right? Now, not necessarily for an agency or a client rather who is struggling to pay, but in other situations, you can also incentivize early payment. So, especially if some of your customers are like large enterprises, these individuals are, they're not paying because they don't have the cash. They're not paying because they are people whose job it is to manage the AP cycle. And one of the metrics they're measured on is the AP cycle. And they're trying to lengthen it for as long as possible. That's their whole job. Their whole job is to pay you as late as possible. And so the thing about them, though, is you can negotiate with these people. You can say, hey, look, I get it. Your target is 60 days. I really need 30 days. I'd be willing to offer you X in order to take you from 60 to 30. And the beautiful thing about X is that in most organizations, it's not really about the how much, it's about the, is there an X? Because these people their job is to get something. So if they're going to give you something, they need to get something. And they're less concerned about how much they got and more concerned that they got something. So you'd be surprised by how little you could give up. Hey, here's a 0.5% of the invoice, or 1% at the most, right? Even, less than payment transaction fees would be if you're willing to pay in 15 days. And that kind of becomes a win-win. You get what you're looking for, and they get a win themselves. They say, look at me. I negotiated a discount on our invoice. I can put that on my annual review and ride off into the sunset. So anyway, I'd say those are my primary strategies for trying to expedite AR. Cool. Look, with that, I think we've had a really successful first agency hot seat for those folks that dropped in, asked questions, got answers. We very much appreciate it. And what I will say is, meet us back here next Thursday, 2:00, or a month from now, not next Thursday, a month from now, 2:00. We'll do it all over again. Bring your questions. All right, crew. Have a good week.